Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I'm the founder and CEO of Autism in Black Inc., where we aim to include the excluded.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. I am your host, Maria Davis-Pierre, licensed mental health counselor and the CEO and founder of Autism in Black, Inc. Today, I am here with Dr. Stacy Haynes, who is another wonderful speaker for the 4th annual Autism in Black virtual conference. We are so excited to have her here. She is a licensed professional counselor and educator with over 20 years of mental health experience, specializing in treating behavioral and emotional challenges of children and families. She is a clinically licensed professional counselor in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and an approved clinical supervisor from the National Board of Certified Counselors. She is the owner and clinical director of Little Hands Family Services, LLC. She is also a proud wife and a mother of 2 children. Welcome today, Dr. Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very, very excited, one, about being able to talk to you in this podcast, 2, about the workshop that you're going to be doing for our 4th annual conference. The title of your workshop is called 3E Students, Gifted, Disabled, and Black. That title alone is a showstopper. I know it stopped me in my tracks when the team brought your proposal. I was like, oh, we definitely need to talk about this. So what inspired you to address the unique needs of Black autistic students, especially those who are gifted, and why is this topic important?
Well, I have to say my inspiration has been my nephew. And so my nephew is autistic. He is in 5th grade. And to watch our family go through the challenge of advocating, right, for him to be allowed in a gifted program, right? It sounds, some of the concerns that were brought up was, oh, well, he's autistic, and how will he be with getting along with the other students, and the pressure. And so that really inspired me to kind of dive deep into this work to say, where do we find our students? What are the resources? What's that community support look like, even for our gifted students? And then we talk about 2E, right? Twice exceptional, our students with an IEP who are also gifted. But then looking at even the idea, right, that our Black students are oftentimes overlooked for our gifted programs. And so that's where the title came from.
Perfect. And you talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced with your nephew. Can we elaborate on just specific challenges as a whole faced by Black autistic students in the education system, especially when it comes to the gifted program? Here at my children's school, we call it enrichment. And what I dislike about it is that they can actually remove and put them back in this enrichment program as they please. So that alone was a little frustrating for me, because it's always, are they going to be in it the next year? And then if not, do I have to worry about her being bored? And
Right.
as she's bored, then behavioral challenges come about. So can we talk about those challenges?
Yeah, and one thing in my workshop, what I'm going to kind of address is what you were just mentioning, right? The criteria. If you look at programs, it's different. It's teacher recommendation in a lot of programs. There's no standardization of who gets in, right? So even the idea your student here in New Jersey, we have they call it like Excel. And so your student could be in that program based on standardized test scores. But again, teacher recommendation is really what's going to put that student. When we look at the specific challenge of Black autistic students, and then we go male, right? So let's go gender for a second. When we have behavior concerns within school and academics, already our teachers are like, no, thank you, right? But again, looking at the diagnosis, looking at how are we supporting our autistic students in that space so they can participate, because many of them thrive in gifted programs, right? It is that I'm bored with the regular curriculum. this challenges, this gives us space to be like, hey, let me use my creative interest. Let me dive into this particular subject and topic. And so my workshop will definitely talk about some of those challenges with identification for programs, making sure that parents and caregivers are aware of how to look for, how your school district even will select students for their programs, and giving parents that kind of information as well, because that's also key. We have to know what the selection process is.
You are absolutely correct because for our daughter, she was actually in the enrichment program for 2 years before we even knew.
Yeah.
They didn't
They,
tell
they don't tell you, right?
us. They didn't tell us. They did
Yeah,
not ask for any
right.
signature. The only reason that we found out is because I was trying to get her special education services. So I was trying to get her an
Mm,
IEP 504
yeah.
because her ADHD really manifests in the fact of her fidgeting, moving, not being able to focus,
Mhm.
so much of impulsivity as her twin. But for her, it was a lot of,
Yeah.
I don't want to be here. This is boring. And I'm like, okay, let's get her
Mhm.
services. And they mentioned it during the meeting. And I said, what is enrichment?
Like, wait a minute.
They're like, oh, that's our gifted program. I said, how long has she been in this program?
Right. Right. And that's an interesting thing because even here in New Jersey, it's interesting to get the test that says whether or not they qualify. We had to actually ask for it. They did not send them home. And so that was something we were fortunate. The fifth grade teacher said to the students, hey, you're going to take a test that's going to say if you're gifted or not. And all the students were super excited. And of course, my daughter comes home and she's like, Mommy, I want to know if I'm gifted or not. And so that became how we even found out that you could ask for the test. Everything else comes home, but that one for some reason, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a struggle. And then with the fact, like you said, not
Mhm.
knowing about the criteria, 1 minute you're in, the next minute you're not. I was concerned about that. And I was like, I think we're gonna get her tested, her IQ tested, which we did. And then they told us that still doesn't matter because it is teacher recommendation.
Recommendation.
And
Hmm.
I was like, this will be another fight if she gets
Hmm.
pulled out. And that's something that parents also have to think about for our children, because when you're talking about that 3E of being Black, disabled, and gifted, that's just another intersectional layer of
Yeah.
having to advocate and fight for things.
This episode of the Autism in Black podcast is sponsored by Amazon, our title sponsor for the 4th annual Autism in Black conference, and Grant Makers for Girls of Color, our gold sponsor for the 4th annual Autism in Black conference. Special thanks to Amazon and Grant Makers for Girls of Color for their sponsorship and making an impact.
Mhm. Yes.
So
And
I,
as a therapist, walking along families, right? That's been that struggle. And I always say we're going in advocating, we're going in asking, we're going to be optimistic and hopeful, but right, it becomes, the letter of the law, right? And then finding people who want to stay with the letter of the law versus saying, hey, these are our children, right? Looking at the fact that even supporting giftedness, and I'll talk about in my workshop that difference between giftedness, being autistic, right? And some of the overlap, some of the criteria that we kind of see from even a behavioral perspective. We'll do a case study and look at that overlap because giftedness has to be supported, right, with an IEP.
does. And if you guys want to see that full presentation that Dr. Stacy is going to be doing. You have to
Yeah.
get your tickets to the 4th annual Autism in Black conference. You can go to www.autismblack.org/conference 2024. Now, as a fellow clinician, and you also have extensive experience, let's move on and talk about what are some of those effective strategies or evidence-based practices that educators and practitioners can implement to better support Black autistic gifted students in the classroom, or just Black autistic students, period, because I know that that is something that is a struggle.
Right. And when we think about evidence-based, I'm a big fan of collaborative and proactive solutions, and that's an evidence-based model problem solving, right, at its core. One of the things we say when you see an autistic student, you just see one, right? And one of the things I really emphasize with the families that I work with is that that identification doesn't tell me much, right? I still have to sit down with my student and I'll say things like, tell me, what's your difficulty when it's come time for reading, right? And I'll hear things like, those words on the page are too much, it's overwhelming. Even for my really bright, gifted kids, it's one of the things in asking the right questions about even the academics. What's difficult when it's time to write in math? You know, whether it's, I love math, but I don't want to show my work, right? Even at the college level, it's the students who struggle with the idea of homework. To hear students say things like, it should be done in school, it's perspective, right? And so, really helping parents to use problem solving to hear their child's perspective on the challenge, right? We don't want to stay stuck. I do a lot of work with families around coming up with solutions that work. And then we take those solutions that we've problem solved and actually include them in IEPs. And so that's been that link for parents with schools. I often talk to parents about creating just that list of things that we know work from year to year and start with that as a strength, right? That email that goes to the 8 teachers in middle school, right? To say, hey, we're going to start with that, but identifying even the strengths and building on what's worked in years previous.
And it's so important. And I think you mentioned great that those skills are still needed in college. For
Mhm.
me,
Yes.
I was identified gifted
Mhm.
in all of my adolescence. I was identified gifted in elementary school. However, nobody saw my disabilities. I was not identified as ADHD until I was 19, and then I didn't get my autism diagnosis until my 30s. So I went
Mhm.
through all of primary school with no added supports, felt always exhausted, got to college, and the
Mhm.
ADHD was noticed because of my executive functioning. I'm now in my PhD program and I still need those skills. I still need
Mhm.
the help. And it's even harder to get some of these supports at this level. And it's just like we have to, one, teach our children what they need and to speak up for themselves. I wish I would have knew how to advocate for
Mhm.
myself and be like, I'm struggling and not have that shame
Right.
of, why are you struggling? You're a
Mhm.
gifted student. You shouldn't be struggling.
Mhm.
It should be easy. So to take that shame away and understand that we
Yeah.
do need supports because emotional IQ and your actual academic IQ are
Mhm.
two.
Yes. And you hit such a great point in recognizing that these will be supports that we'll need through our life, right? So even post-college, thinking about the career supports, and
Yeah.
what does that look like? And being able to advocate in a place of work. My daughter's a Minson and she's high IQ. And so even now, getting to prepare her for college, right? These are these conversations. I know what it looks like, even with a high IQ kiddo, to sit and struggle with concepts that are vague, right? And sitting with her, and I'm like, okay, how do we break this down? How do we get through this poem? But I won't be in her college campus to be able to do that, right? So transferring even those skills, I think, right, is so key when we think about helping not just with the academics, but how does this show up in our spaces, you know, beyond even college and education, even our workspaces for our youth.
Yes, thank you for that.
Mhm.
One thing that, of course, I like to talk about is cultural responsivity. So, in your experience, what role does cultural responsivity, cultural humility, and awareness play in effectively supporting Black autistic students in addressing these disparities?
Well, I think we have to look at what's happening within our culture, right? And so, even for example, diagnosis. I have had so many families at teenagers, 18, 19 years old, coming in, and no one has diagnosed them from pediatricians to educators to, and just like you just shared, right? And so, one of the things, even from the understanding that our Black students, when we see behavioral concerns, we're not thinking mental health diagnosis. We think
Nope.
defiance, we think disobedience, we think punishment, even in schools. And so being able to first pause, and I often question people to say, when you look at this Black student, have you thought, is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it a developmental diagnosis, right? Is it a learning disability? That's where we need to go first, even when we're looking at the challenges that our students are presenting in front of us. And so I can stand on any platform, and I always argue that is our biggest challenge, even amongst Black clinicians, right? You know, that scared straight for give them the hard hand and the hard discipline. And I say, my fellow clinicians that look like me, please stop. Listen, please go evidence-based. Please go into treatment modalities that actually work for our children, right? That work for our families. Most families I tease when they come in, they've tried hitting, they've tried punishment, they've tried discipline, and we're still here, right? And so that's really my connection point with many families, to start saying, let's view and understand mental health. We do have to stay within our community. Let's recognize it for what it is. Your child is not less than, right? There, I love the neurodiverse term in the sense that our brains are different, and that's okay. One thing I really teach people about is that, I think as we continue to see the DSM change, that we're just going to be talking more about just brain differences and then just how to support brain differences, not deficits, just differences. And that's going to be important. Even as I talk to young people, I say, listen, we're not less than, we're just different. Let's keep it moving. And how do we do that?
Exactly. I'm always talking to our colleagues and letting them know that, hey, especially those who are not Black, our culture comes in the room with us. It does not stay outside. We have to be mindful of our own biases and also the biases that are woven into our DSM, in our evaluations. And this is what is setting our children up to be school to prison pipeline and be failed because we're not checking ourselves. I had dealt with this with my son in pre-K, of a teacher trying to push him into a behavioral program, and he was just 3. Like, ma'am, get
Shared
yourself
experience. Listen, listen. That same. And my son, it was interesting. He would run out of the classroom, and they went to behavior. No one ever thought anxiety. No one ever said, "Hey, maybe he's feeling overwhelmed." I remember we transitioned my son from a small private school to a public school, and when we put him in the public school, the second or third day we received a letter from the vice principal, and it said if he continued this behavior, he would be suspended. And the behavior was crying. And I went to the school with mama bear mentality, and I was like, let me explain something to you. So if it was a little girl that was crying,
exactly.
would she have a letter? Oh, but it's disruptive. And I said, and have we thought about the fact that he has anxiety, that he's in a new place, it's a new transition. We're talking the second and third day of school. But again, Black boy, predominantly white environment, and this was the letter that I received coming home. And that's where I sit with parents and saying, I've walked that walk of having to advocate, having to say, hey, listen, please understand who my child is before you want to give some type of discipline or, again, supports that are not supportive. I've had everything thrown at us versus what my child really needed, right? And so I think it's important, even when they're young, like you just said, right? Even 3 years old, we need to listen to our children and when they're young, and be able to take a step back. Because I know I always talk to parents, we cringe when we get the phone call, when we get the emails from the educators, right? You see the phone number, you're like, no, I don't want to answer it today. Not today, please, thank you, right? And I say, but here again, right? Even in that moment, being able to see that our child is struggling and our job is to help, not to discipline. Discipline, again, doesn't teach if it's not teaching, right? And so coming in with supports, strategies, that's what we want to do to help our child to succeed.
Exactly. And understanding that behavior is a form of communication.
Absolutely.
Trying to communicate. My son was eloping. Why is he eloping? Let's look at what's going on here, and the fact that I continue, I was like, I'm going to send you guys an invoice. The fact that I have to keep coming in here and training you all. You're going to get it.
Exactly. One of my first professional developments in a school was actually my son's school.
Yeah, mine
because
too.
the administrator said I had never had someone come in and not only educate our teachers, but give ideas and solutions, right? We wrote up a whole list of things that they can put into place, even one of the, it's interesting, even the idea that his hand would hurt when he did right? And this was, an environment. And I said, did we have everything evaluate? And they're looking at me, a group of educators, their INRS team, and everybody's quiet. And I'm like, well, that's a very common thing, right? When we talk about, again, even the ability to write, our students are struggling with those fine motor skills. And so just knowing as Black parents, also being able to be in that space and have ideas and solutions is what I really encourage parents to do. Walk in there, have your information, have your papers. I teach my parents to have their portfolio full of all the things that they've used, but also ideas that they're willing to share to say, hey, we're in this with you. We want to help and support our child.
I love that. As we wrap up, what are your hopes for the future of education and support for Black autistic students, gifted and not? And how do you envision creating more equitable and inclusive opportunities for them?
Well, I think it starts with conferences like yours. I'm hoping that the audience is filled with educators. I do believe our educators, as we look at neurodiversity numbers, right, within our classrooms, we used to have 3 or 4 students and maybe 20 students classroom. Now we're going to have about half, right? And so thinking about how do we prepare this next generation of educators to support a classroom of over 50% of your students with neurodiverse differences, right? And I think that when we look at educational support and being creative, I tell my families that I work with, I'm optimistic and I'm creative, and I will put everything out there until they tell us no. But I think that's also where we have to not lose hope. We don't have to give up, and we don't have to accept that this is all we can do, right? That answer, I just cringe when people say, well, this is all that we've done and this is all that we can do. And I'm like, well, no, that's not an individual education plan then. Because even the title of the document means we can go beyond what you've done for other students because it is individual. And so, I'm very optimistic that trauma-informed care will be more prevalent in our schools and people understanding how to support even the physical response, our sensory response of our students, and being able to just be open to families, right? And helping and supporting families and recognizing how tough it is for our families.
I love that. For trauma-informed, that is something that I am constantly advocating for, that and de-escalation tactics for schools, because I feel like they are twofold.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack in that and a lack in training. And now with COVID, even furthering the shortage of teachers,
Yes.
properly trained teachers who have the proper certifications in the background. It's like we've taken some steps forward and here we go, starting all over. But, having advocates and educators and professionals like you in the field who are advocating just as hard as all of us makes me a little bit happier to know that we are trying to close this gap. So I appreciate that. And I give you your flowers for all of the hard work that you're doing, that you've done. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. So thank you for that.
Yes, and thank you. I appreciate you. Even seeing the beautiful image of all of the speakers, the folks that'll be hosting workshops, it is exciting to see in this space. So thank you for creating that space for folks.
Thank you. And tell the people where they can find you, because I know that they are going to be trying to hire you to come into their school, to train their staff. So where can they find you besides the Autism in Black Conference?
Great, thank you so much. So you can find me, I'm at Dr. Stacy Haynes, Haynes, LPC.com. You can Google Little Hands Community Promise or Little Hands Family Services, and you'll find my books on Amazon. Powerful, Peaceful Parenting, Guiding Children, Changing Lives has won 2 book awards. I do love that as a resource for parents. And I'm a Vibes Kid is my most recent children's book. And it uses augmented reality to teach social skills as students are reading, and it is a book about autism for youth. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Of course. And guys, I'm going to buy a couple of copies and they will be giveaway prizes at the conference. So if you want some copies of the books, come to the conference as well, and we can get you a chance to win a book. So, and all of Dr. Stacy's links are going to be in our show notes so that you can hire her and come in there for some PD training schools that you need. So make sure you hire her. And all of her links for her books and stuff will be there as well, so you can support her book as well. So thank you, Dr. Stacy, for coming on the podcast, dropping all these gems. I know everybody is going to enjoy it.
All right. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast, and we will catch you on the next episode.
If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. Don't forget to share your takeaways from the show on your IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find and share them. If you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community at facebook.com/group/AIBpod.